Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and tonight I am here just to help you relax, to drift off to sleep by the sound of the waves, like the whispers of old souls. I know you have come to this video not just to hear the story, but also to find a deep, peaceful sleep. But before we begin, please gently like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to tell you strange stories under the dim moonlight. Where are you from? And what time is it where you live? Just relax. Let your body relax. Put all your worries down by your pillow. Let me take you into a world of mysteries where the wind and the waves mingle, and unsolved mysteries are waiting to be told. Are you ready? Stay quiet, friend. Lila sank into the couch, the flickering glow of the TV screen illuminating the shadows that loomed the darkened room. She had chosen a silly rom-com, hoping to distract herself. But the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Every creak of the old house made her jump, and the shadows in the corners seemed to whisper her name in a language she couldn't understand. It was late, and her roommate Clara was working on her thesis upstairs. But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't the only ones in the home. An uneasy tension coiled in her stomach, forcing her to triple check behind each door, under the couch, and even peered behind the shoe rack, half expecting to find something or someone hiding within. She ducked below the kitchen counters, her fingers feeling for a butcher's knife. Her heart sank when she felt the empty spot in the knife rack. It was missing. The chill creeping up her spine told her that whatever was happening was more than just her imagination. She glanced toward the back door, where the moonlight shimmered through the glass panes, casting eerie reflections that danced on the walls. A sudden gust of wind rattled the bay window, sending a shiver through her. Something was off. With a tentative step, she approached the back door, feeling the cold metal handle beneath her palm. The moment she unlocked it, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sound startled her, and she snatched it up, her pulse quickening at the sight of Clara's name. "Did you hear that?" the message read. A cold dread settled over her, crawling beneath her skin as the unease that had settled over her intensified. What could Clara possibly be hearing? She typed back, "Hear what?" but hesitated, glancing down the hallway that led to the stairs. The dim light from the TV cast erratic shadows that flickered and danced, and for a fleeting moment, Lila thought she saw something move behind the curtains. Her breath hitched, a primal instinct warning her that she was not alone. Maybe it was just the movie messing with her mind, but the feeling of being watched pressed heavier on her chest. Another message chimed in. "I think someone's outside." Panic surged through Lila's veins, prickling her skin. She stood frozen for a moment, weighing her options. Should she check the back door or run upstairs to her roommate? Clara's words echoed in her mind. Why would she think someone was outside? How could she guess that? Why is she being so casual about it? Are you sure? Lila typed back, her fingers trembling. Just stay quiet, Clara replied. I'll call you when I'm sure. A shiver ran down Lila's spine. Her instincts screamed at her to call the police, but fear held her in place. The silence grew oppressive, and she could hear the faint sound of something dragging from above. Without thinking, she moved to the back door, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. As she reached for the handle, a scream erupted from upstairs, a raw, piercing wail that silenced the night. It was Clara's voice. Adrenaline propelled Lila forward as she bolted toward the staircase, her heart hammering in her chest. Clara! She yelled, bounding up the steps 2 at a time. The hallway stretched out before her, dark and foreboding, thick with an air of dread. Clara! She shouted again, panic clawing at her throat. The scream had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt like a warning. When she reached Clara's door, her hand trembled as she tried to push it open. It was locked. Why was it locked? Lila fumbled for her spare key, forcing the door open. The room was empty, save for the dim glow of Clara's laptop on the desk. Papers were strewn about, books toppled over, and the window was wide open, allowing a chilling breeze to sweep through the room. Lila stepped inside, her heart racing. Clara, Lila called softly, her voice just above a whisper. Where are you? Suddenly, she heard a soft rustling from the bathroom. Her breath caught, and fear settled like a stone in her stomach as she approached, each step feeling heavier than the last. She reached for the door, her mind racing with images of Clara being attacked. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle, glancing back at the open window that seemed to beckon her to escape. Then her phone buzzed again, illuminating the screen with another message from her roommate. Don't come in. Lila's heart sank, and a sense of dread washed over her. The message was sent from Clara's phone, but something felt wrong. Are you okay? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The rustling from the bathroom stopped abruptly, replaced by a suffocating silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Lila took a step back, cold sweat prickling her skin. She felt trapped. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave Clara. With trembling hands, she yanked open the bathroom door. Clara stood there, her eyes went out and wild, blood staining her nightgown, the crimson liquid soaking into her hair like a macabre halo. In the bathtub, a body lay motionless, limbs grotesquely scattered like a puzzle, arms and legs discarded beside the sink. The young woman's lifeless eyes stared vacantly at the ceiling, unseeing. Lila could barely make out the limb hanging from Clara's hand, for in the other was a knife, glistening in the remnants of her victim. Lila froze, her mouth dry and her mind reeling. The air thickened with a metallic tang, and she could feel her lungs begging for air. "Clara," her voice cracked, trembling as violently as her body was. "What have you done?" Clara slowly turned her head, a strange, twisted smile creeping across her lips, glistening with the blood that stained her face. "You said you didn't hear anything," she said, her voice cold and deliberate. "You lied." "I didn't," Lila began, only to be cut off. "You lied," Clara repeated, her tone sharp, cutting through the air like the blade in her hand. "You need to stay quiet, friend, and I'll make sure you never lie again." The door behind Lila slammed shut, sealing her inside the suffocating darkness. Fear surged through her as Clara advanced, the knife glinting ominously in the dim light. "Clara, please." Lila's plea faded into a whimper, the weight of impending dread crushing her. Without warning, Clara lunged forward, the blade slicing through the air with a cruel precision. Pain exploded in Lila's mouth, and she gasped, trying to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the metallic taste of blood. As Clara withdrew the knife, Lila felt a sudden emptiness. Her tongue, her voice, her very essence slipped from her mouth and fell to the floor with a sickening thud. Clara's eyes gleamed with a wild delight as she leaned closer, whispering words that curled around Lila's mind like smoke. "Now you'll stay quiet," Clara said, her voice low and dripping with satisfaction. "No more lies, no more noise." The door behind Lila slammed shut, the weight of darkness closing in, silencing her voice and sealing her fate. Past imperfect W, mentions of mental and physical abuse. Bill sat bolt upright in the hotel bed, heart pounding to a familiar refrain. The dream had reasserted itself with a vengeance from the moment he'd seen the updated list of people attending the conference. One name had stood out. Dake Scratchard was the name of the boy who'd haunted Bill Brown's life more years than he cared to remember. Dreams fueled by past memories disturbed his nights when equal amounts of dread and fear surged through his veins, rendering him helpless. As always, the nightmare was a variation on a theme. In it, Bill was a teenage boy running from the gang. He often came close to evading capture, but at the last minute tripped over his shoelaces or some other encumbrance. Then he found himself falling flat on his face outside the old school toilets, the inner doors of which rose up like whited sepulchres. Up close, he could see every cell of his tormentor's face. "Ginger needs to be taught a lesson," came out of that hate-filled mouth. A bully, aided by his contemptible band of followers, with their menacing chants of Ginger, Ginger, Ginger. Even now, their words filled the corridors of his mind like a background hiss. No! The sound seemed to come from somewhere outside, as if it belonged to someone else. Not him. You're just begging for it, Billy Ginger. If the teachers won't correct you, we must do it for them. Billy knew no teacher would come. They were never there when you needed them. In any case, the gang always had some lackey watching out. Soon they'd have him crawling on his hands and knees, scooting about like an insect, while they kicked him on the hard stone floor. Their mocking jeers running through him. He was nothing more than a piece of meat to be hauled about. For them, the high point was shoving his face into the toilet bowl. The stench was the least of it. Clinging for support, he tried to keep everything tight shut while they flushed. Knowing he could not hold out for long, he spluttered to be let go. Then, just as he was about to give up, a final flush signaled his release. He was pulled up, squirming like a rat from a sewer, and left heaving on the floor. For a few minutes, he lay there curled and defenseless, all resistance gone, until the next time, and the time after that. Something so primal, so feral. He could smell it now. Even after all this time, he was defined by it, as if the abuse had become part of a warped pattern of D and A, making him only half human. But somehow, he'd known he was worth more than that. At least his dog seemed to think so. Through it all, the only thing that kept Bill going was the thought of the black Labrador faithfully waiting in the porch. Back home, Kelpie licked away the wounds and salt tears, stayed beside him till the pain subsided. Without Kelpie, he would not have survived, for the purity of a dog's heart knows no bounds. Switching on the bedside lamp, Bill waited until his breathing steadied. Coughing, he climbed into a dressing gown and stepped out onto a small balcony. In the courtyard below, the air was prescient with a damp chill. A few lone trees were scattering leaves marking the onset of winter. Inhaling a sneaky cigarette, Bill considered his options. It had all happened so long ago, yet the dream had reignited the past, making him feel he could never escape its clutches. If Bill recited the facts of his life enough times, he almost convinced himself of their worth. On paper, he'd worked hard, got married and divorced, and had a son he barely saw. He'd mostly married his wife to please his father because she came from a better background, and look where that had got him. It wasn't his ex's fault if along the way he'd supplemented whatever was missing with a few women he was physically attracted to, but not much else. In the end, it had been like ships passing in the night, all except for Bella. With her, He'd come close to casting a loveless marriage aside, but in the end, something had stopped him. The risk of getting it wrong had been too great, but all that was in the past. Although Bella had recently returned to the company where they both worked, albeit in a less demanding role, he rarely saw her these days. And according to rumors, she was now with someone in the shower. Bill imagined washing the past down the plug hole. Soon he planned to do just that. The only fly in the ointment, of course, was Bella. He wasn't sure whether she'd be attending the conference. Really, bumping into her was the least of his worries. But if he did, so be it. He hadn't actually seen her name on the list of attendees, so it seemed unlikely. Overall, it would be easier if she didn't attend, because that afternoon, Bill was making his first big speech in his new role as Regional Operations Manager. As if there wasn't enough going on without having to deal with affairs of the heart. The speech, eagerly anticipated, was expected to be the highlight of the day. In the hotel room, examining the set of knives his father had given him as an 18th birthday present, Bill was confronted by powerful emotions. Before him were a dazzling array of sharp pieces, all with wooden handles for an extra firm grip. It was almost pleasurable selecting the one with the pointed end. He carefully placed it in a sheath and adding it to a concealed section of his briefcase. In the mirror, he observed hair that was thinning a little at the sides. Other than that, it was still thick and brown, with just a hint of chestnut. Impressive in a well-cut suit, he was tall enough to be considered distinguished. To some, his features might be regarded as handsome. His eyes, however, were preternaturally bright. Sighing deeply, he exited the room. Clutching his laptop and briefcase, he made his way along the plushly carpeted corridor, entered the lift, and headed the 3 floors down to the conference room area. Psyching himself up for whatever lay ahead, he focused on his achievements. Only by drawing on every retail milestone was he able to make sense of the wasteland that was his emotional life. His mind's eye framed the certificates that took pride of place on his home office wall, charting his journey from sales assistant to the coveted role of Regional Operations Manager for one of the country's most successful chain stores. Stores that sold fashionable clothes and accessories for prices most people could afford. Bill's journey into a better life had only really begun when his parents had moved from a London suburb to a city in the Midlands. Then aged 15, he'd welcomed the move with open arms, for it had given him a chance to start afresh in a place where no one knew him, especially at school. He had loved walking unrecognized through the city's streets and visiting its ancient cathedral. One Saturday morning, plucking up courage, he'd walked into one of the city's department stores and landed himself a Saturday job in the menswear department. When he returned home, his mum made him a cup of tea, and Kelpie wagged a warm greeting. You could do a lot worse. They've got people queuing up to get a place in that store, his mum had commented. Then, examining him more closely, she observed, You've darkened your hair. Isn't that what Elvis Presley did? I expect so. I never liked my natural color, and I want to fit in at this school. That was the closest he'd come to admitting the bullying at his old school. He never told anyone about the suicidal thoughts. Chazo, he couldn't miss her. Bella was a figure of light breaking the conference room formality and wearing the most distinctive outfit. To him, she was the classiest person there, surrounded as she was by an adoring team of managers at one of the middle tables. Distracted by her presence, he could hardly wait for a chance to speak to her. The chance came while she was lining up to choose from a tray of canapes during the lunch break. I wasn't expecting you to be here, Bella, he said. I wasn't expecting to be here, but there was a change of plan. It's so good to see you. He found himself saying, Well, I missed the company and the people. I wasn't the right fit for the new position, even if it was a promotion. It seemed fortuitous when my old vacancy came up again. So, you didn't have a problem with going back to your old role? There's no need to avoid using the word demotion. I won't be offended, she laughed. I came to realize I didn't need all the hassle that goes with a high-powered job. I realized I'd made a mistake, and the opportunity came to rectify it. I want a simple life, especially now I'm single. Don't worry. It's all worked out for the best. He wasn't right for me either. Bill could hardly believe what he was hearing. It's really good to see you, he said again. I'm glad you think that, she said, smiling brightly. Catching up with Bella had been great. So much so, watching her sleeping the next morning, Bill had almost forgotten about the other thing. He decided he'd know what to do when the time came. If it came, Bill was pouring coffee when Bella opened her eyes. They were warm, like Kelpie's had once been. That smells good, she said. I remembered you like it's strong. The world outside remained foggy and damp. But for the moment, none of that mattered. Fully dressed, Bill joined Bella on the bed. What's the matter? You look like you've got the world on your shoulders, she said kindly. Nothing. Just the conference. A lot to think about. But that was only partly true. If only he could tell her what was really on his mind. Part of him wondered whether meeting Bella again was purely coincidental, or a sign he should let the past go, once and for all. He might have said more, but then the phone rang. Good luck with the speech. Not that you're going to need it, Bella said, getting up and kissing him. Down. On the way to the conference room, Bill overheard a conversation between two hotel staff members. Are the cameras still out? Only on the 3rd floor. Also, the ones by the bathroom. They're down, too. Okay, not good. How long before they are fixed? A few hours at most. Maintenance will get it sorted. It won't affect the general running of things. Bill felt almost disappointed to hear the news about the cameras. After his night with Bella, He'd been on the verge of scrapping his original plan. Now fate seemed to be pulling him back. Yet he still hadn't come across his nemesis. Charlie. About 40 minutes into the second day of conference, a man best described as nondescript entered the hall. Head down, he weaved his way to the numbered seat. Bill clocked him, and his heart sank. Something of the man's stance reminded him of Dake Scratchard grown older. But was it him? He couldn't be sure. 2 hours into the conference, during the talk on sustainability, the man scurried towards one of the exits, and all doubt vanished. Shriveled he might be, but it was definitely Scratchard, galvanized into action. Bill left his seat and headed for the nearest exit. Gripping his case so tightly his fingers hurt, he followed the figure until he disappeared into the bathroom. Unless he had to, Bill generally avoided public bathrooms. But this was going to be the exception. Adrenaline flooding through him, he quietly opened the door and stepped inside. Other than a pulsing through his ears and the sound of a dripping tap, all was quiet. Then he heard a retching coming from one of the cubicles. A minute later, the door opened and Scratchard stepped out. Engrossed in his own suffering, he ran to the nearest sink and stood there heaving, watching unobserved. Bill was torn between revulsion and an intense hatred. Mostly, he was seized by a hatred for all he'd been put through, overcome by a rage for the way this pathetic being had ruined so much of his life. It was too late to change his mind now. The die was cast. Gripping the knife, he advanced, his anger rising to a peak. Suddenly, the bathroom door sprang open, and to his astonishment, Bella entered. She came and stood behind him, putting her arms round his waist. Then, opening his fist, she carefully removed the knife from his hand and put it behind her back. "It's not the answer," she whispered, hurriedly placing it in her bag. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Startled out of his sickness, Bill's childhood enemy locked eyes with his victim in the mirror. Both men were shaking, one from the effects of illness, the other from the horror of what might have been. "What the hell?" Scratchard broke out. Then there was a flash of recognition as the years fell back. "Surely not. I wasn't sure if it was you in the meeting, probably because your hair is different. But it's Ginger Bill, isn't it? Only the last time I saw you." The words trailed off, vanished into the unknown. "But you never did see me," Bill said through gritted teeth. "All you saw was a weak boy you could bully because of his hair color. As I recall, the last time I saw you and your sick gang, you'd forced my head down the bog. Have you any idea what that does to someone?" "Did I do that?" Dake's face reddened. "I was a bit of a jerk in those days. If it's any consolation, life hasn't exactly treated me well. As you can see, I'm not a well man, the edges blurring, Bill felt the first stirrings of pity. "What's actually wrong with you, Scratchard?" Calling him by his surname felt like a minor victory. He'd never dared call him anything in school. Dake shook his head despairingly. "If it's not one thing, it's another these days. I had heart trouble a few years ago, and now this. I keep having to running to the toilet and have a raging thirst." "You need medical attention," Bella said unexpectedly. "You're showing all the signs of severe diabetes. My father got like that before he was diagnosed." 10 minutes later, Bill was sitting with his childhood tormentor in the lobby, waiting for assistance. "I'm sorry for making your school life hard," Dake muttered, unable to meet Bill's eyes. "It was worse than that. You bullied me to the point I didn't feel life was worth living." "Why did you?" "I need to know," Bill demanded. Dake searched what remained of his soul for answers. "I don't know," he admitted at last. "Maybe it made me feel more in control. Life was miserable at home, and at school, I was somebody in front of the other kids. The rest of the day passed in a blur." But Bill somehow found the strength to get through his talk. He got a good reception at the end, and he couldn't help noticing Bella was clapping the hardest. "What made you come into the bathroom like that?" he asked her much later. "I couldn't believe it when I saw you there. You kept saying his name in your sleep, saying you're dead over and over. I haven't forgotten the nightmares you had when we were together before. Imagine what would have happened if you hadn't appeared, Bella." "It doesn't bear thinking about," she said. "If you want us to make a go of this, you've got to promise me you're going to get help. The past will always get in the way if you don't." It turned out to be an easy promise to keep. More than a year after that fateful encounter, the terrible dreams are a thing of the past. Though his old enemy is hardly on Bill's Christmas card list, he no longer regards him as a threat. Now Bill dreams of walking through the park with Bella, taking it in turns to throw a ball for their new dog. Somehow, he feels very close to achieving it. The guinea pigs. Dr. Travers ticked all the boxes on my consent form, and peering over his glasses, assured me an arm transplant was standard practice. "I perform 10 a day," he said, handing me the paperwork. "They're a piece of cake." "Really?" "For sure," he said, indicating where to sign. "It's just brain surgery that gives me a headache." "Stella." The anesthetist rolled her eyes, sighed, and asked if I'd any allergies. "None," I replied, scanning the small print. "That's just perfect," she said, clearing her throat. "Would you prefer gas and air, or the full works?" "What's the norm?" I said, catching her eye. "That depends." She smiled. "Are you squeamish?" "Chowza." When I signed up for military service 5 years ago, I'd selected the BAGS health insurance option. Biologically Accelerated Growth Systems, or BAGS, for short, was a third-party company pioneering an experimental limb replacement scheme. The government initiated the idea, and the Ministry of Defense embraced the concept to counteract the ongoing threat of IEDs. In the event of a severe injury or amputation, they promised us rapid treatment and substitute limbs. All they required from volunteers were 2 pints of blood and sufficient genetic material to cultivate a trauma clone in their body farm. It made sense, and I had nothing to lose, hopefully. I have to admit that the lure of the extra pay motivated me when I signed the forms. Any potential injuries gained in active combat were far from my mind, and further complications seemed a remote possibility. It was during the 6 months of basic training I discovered no one else had enrolled for the BAGS insurance policy. Perhaps everyone reckoned the scheme was just a gimmick. Maybe I'd misread the caveat on the consent form about transplanting living tissue. I mean, it never occurred to me I'd meet the limb donor face to face. Tutua, my last tour of duty, occurred in April 2015. Around the time jihadist fighters released a video of the ancient city of Nimrud erupting in a cloud of dust and smoke. They attacked its priceless sculptures and frescoes with sledgehammers and power tools, then detonated the 3,000-year-old Assyrian ruins. The wanton demolition came amidst a wave of attacks on Allied forces in Iraq. I lost my left forearm in Nasiriyah, about 360 clicks south-southeast of Baghdad, near the ruins of the ancient city of Ur. Sergeant Albury snagged his boot tip on a tripwire and didn't stand a chance. He was toast in an instant, poor sod. I was next in line, and the landmine's devastating blast threw me across the street. So much for the cradle of civilization. There was little below my left shoulder when I regained consciousness in the field hospital's ICU. The duty surgeon said I was under the knife for 10 hours and told me I was lucky to be alive. He expected a full recovery, having extracted a bucket of the shrapnel from my vital organs, although he expected roving fragments to surface over time. If you have any further issues, he said, picking his teeth, I'm sure your regiment's medics will sort you out. Yeah, right, I thought. But you know what? He wasn't wrong. A serious-minded BAGS employee in an expensive suit attended my bedside the following day and explained the benefits of my policy. He presented a convincing case for urgent action and applied for a consultation on my return to base. I waited 6 weeks for an appointment to discuss my suitability for a limb transplant. Dr. Travers was frank. Either he operated forthwith, or I faced an interminable desk job back at HQ and no more active duty. Are there any risks? I asked. The odds of rejection are slim, he said, frowning. But better than your career prospects as a shorthand typist. Point taken, I said, considering my disadvantage. Dr. Travers glossed over the matter of sourcing and matching a spare limb. It's not all about physical compatibility, he said. There's the psychological aspect to consider. I recall biting my lip when he explained a typical post-op response. It'll be disconcerting and may feel as if it doesn't belong to you, he said. However, just remember, an unfamiliar appendage is far better than the alternative. I'd no time to worry about the details because my allotted day in the operating theater happened within 48 hours. I didn't sleep the night before and entered the theater feeling lightheaded, having followed the nil-by-mouth instruction beforehand. Stella performed her last checks before a nurse handed me a surgical gown, and Dr. Travers scrubbed his hands while we waited for the trauma clone. The freezing cold hiatus on my back in the theater, wearing only a starched cotton gown, was the longest hour of my life. I was covered in goosebumps and shivering from a cold sweat when a masked nurse poked a gurney through the theater's swing doors. She appeared without a drum roll or fanfare, as if she was shoving a burdensome shopping trolley out of a supermarket. The nurse halted parallel to my surgical table, kicked down the brakes, and whipped off the thin sheet to reveal my doppelganger's naked body. It was wired up to a cluster of electrical body monitor pads and strapped down to the metal bed with sturdy leather belts. The left arm sported thick red pre-surgery symbols that looked like a gang member's colors and hanged loose and lifeless above the linoleum. He lay motionless beside me, staring past a bloated plasma bag that dangled aloft and fed blood to an intravenous cannula. Dr. Travers raised his arms and cracked his knuckles and nodded at Stella. She wasted no time and administered a heavy dose of propofol. I remember her asking me to count down from 10, but don't recall getting past 7. When I regained consciousness, my body double was still next to me, an exact copy, except now the left arm was missing, and there was a sutured wound below the shoulder. His eyelids were closed and motionless, except for an occasional REM flutter, and his chest rose and fell in even-paced undulations, as if operated by mechanized bellows. On closer inspection, the trauma clone was nothing like me. There were neither scars and stretch marks, nor any signs of life's long-term damage. The left arm I'd received was similar in size and shape to my original. I mean, I thanked God for my replacement, despite needing months of gym work to strengthen it. Yes, size-wise, it was a splendid match, and Dr. Travers had done a remarkable job. It's just that, well, I don't know. I guess I'll miss that barbed wire tattoo circling my forearm, and all my ginger freckles too. My ex-wife used to love those silly brown spots. "Nobody's perfect," she'd say. If only she knew she could see me now. The adoption process takes time, Dr. Travers said during our meeting a week later. "You ought to be home soon, and you'll adjust in a few weeks." "Will it ever feel like mine?" I said, flexing my stiff new fingers. "Of course," he said, cleaning his spectacles. "Besides, I'm only a phone call away if you need reassurance." Dr. Travers couldn't guarantee the pairing process would work, and I had to be prepared for rejection. He outlined likely symptoms in case the donor's hand didn't marry up with my nervous system. It was a long month in the BAGS Institute while I acclimated to my new limb. I followed the physio's guidelines for recovery and adhered to her plan, exercising as much as possible. The Institute's layout was straightforward. The building supported 8 levels, and most floors contained glass-partitioned offices. As far as I knew, the first floor contained the surgical theater and recovery wards, and the windowless ground floor housed the gym, storage units, and a boiler room. My first floor ward was empty, and I was alone most days, apart from Nurse Winter's morning welfare visits and meal deliveries, and Dr. Travers' weekly progress checks. I seldom encountered any other members of staff on any of the 8 floors, and met nobody in the gym, pool, or sauna facilities. Apart from intermittent security patrols, there were only a couple of employees engaged in gardening and exterior maintenance work. It was on my last day that we had a power cut, and the building lost its heat and lighting. I was exiting the gym at the time, cast into darkness by the occurrence, and strayed down an unfamiliar corridor. It was about 10 minutes before the green overhead emergency lights kicked in, by which time I found myself in one of the storage units. Somehow, I'd bypassed the security system in the outage and found myself lost in a maze of boxes, sealed containers, and cargo bays. I admit being disorientated by the experience. However, a sudden thought occurred. Until that moment, I'd never considered my trauma clone's whereabouts. Where was he? And what condition was he in? Was there accommodation here? Dr. Travers had led me to believe the Institute looked after and supported my trauma clone. So, why had he forbidden me to talk to him or make contact? I was pondering these questions as I meandered down a gentle sloped vehicle access ramp into the basement. As soon as I entered the lower corridors, I heard a low, stuttering hum of clicks and splutters. I thought it was a chattering mechanical turbine spluttering to life. I was wrong. The noise had an organic quality and enveloped me in slow pulses, like surf dissolving between fractured seashells on a distant shore. I stumbled onwards in the pale amber glow until I could advance no further. The light was emanating from translucent ceiling panels within a glass-walled room. Below it stood motionless figures connected to an upper gantry by a complicated loom of feeding tubes and electrical sensor cables. Life support systems, I imagined. The figures all shared similar characteristics, but differed somewhat in musculature, as if they were cuttings taken from a parent and propagated at staggered intervals. They were all naked and standing in equally spaced rows and columns, like life-sized chess pieces, awaiting a call to arms. There were at least 20 of them, all staring ahead with uncomprehending, glazed eyes and indifferent expressions. The wretched creatures were like a herd of cattle grazing in a pasture, oblivious to time and tide, and at the mercy of unknown assailants. I advanced towards the glass wall, and the closest figure's head turned to face me. It was obvious from his missing limb and sutured shoulder that we'd met before. There was a spark of recognition in those dilated pupils, like a dim, flickering light from a dying star. He edged forward as far as his tethers would allow, and raised his right arm in painful increments. All the while, those black pools of artificial existence held their intense, unflinching gaze. His fingertips reached to their full extent, like an unfurling leaf, and stroked the surface of the glass between us. I placed my left hand on the transparent surface and spread my fingers. Without so much as a blink, he mimicked my gesture. Our raised palms mirrored each other, either side of the shatterproof glazing. My hand flinched, as if gripped by its rightful owner, or some vestigial impulse dictated its movement. I hesitated for more than a minute as it twitched and writhed of its own accord. I lowered my eyes, tearing myself from his pitiable stare. 15 millimeters separated us, and yet we were worlds apart, as if we were distant relatives meeting in some parallel universe. I imagined some warmth in his palm, and supposed his instinctive gesture was meant to keep me there. He turned away and returned to his designated position amongst all my other clones. They were all looking at me now. My back spasmed with an intense, muscular shiver, as if I'd felt an icy blast. It was impossible to remain there with all those pairs of eyes judging me. I rubbed my hands together for warmth as I walked away, and I realized my clone wasn't born. He was created. He hadn't emerged from nature. The Institute reared and propagated him from cells which they'd nurtured to a mature specimen. That notion should have consoled me, but it didn't. Dr. Travers was adamant. The trauma clone didn't have a life as such. No family, no memories, and no real concept of a world outside. That was how he told me to frame the situation. "You're lucky," he said. "Not everyone has a chance to replace all their vital organs." I felt sick, looking down at my left arm afterwards, and recalled that awful stump on my doppelganger. Now, I'd encountered him in person. It felt as if I'd been caught red-handed, receiving stolen goods, and by chance met the lawful owner. "Don't worry about it," Dr. Travers said, placating my concerns. I couldn't be at peace with the notion, but I accepted he was right. How else could I live with myself, knowing that the trauma clone's only function was to donate spare parts? Charso. There was a guard of honor as I departed that evening, and I wondered what would happen if my trauma clone escaped. Would he survive in the outside world, or just succumb to nature's mercy, like a domesticated pet that's lost its natural instincts? As I walked across the deserted compound to my vehicle, I couldn't imagine returning here unless the worst happened. I supposed I'd only meet my trauma clone again if I was unlucky during my next tour in the Middle East. But who knows? They hadn't patched me up to stare at a PC all day. Friday the 13th. The storm had been brewing all day. An ominous black sky that only got darker as the hours passed. Perfect for a Friday the 13th, especially one in October. Flynn and I had been working all day at Rewind Rentals, the shop busy with locals picking up horror films to fuel their spooky movie marathons. Upstairs, at the Rewind Theater, we'd been showing a lineup of old-school classics: Freddy Krueger, Halloween, even The Company of Wolves for the hardcore fans. I was setting up the projector in the small, cozy theater room, a bowl of popcorn resting against my hip. The audience, mostly townies who liked the idea of watching horror movies in the vintage ambience of the theater, settled into their worn velvet chairs with drinks, candy, and buttery popcorn. Flynn had put together a killer playlist for the pre-show, layering eerie sounds between trailers for other horror films. The first jump scare in Halloween was coming up, just as the weather outside began to turn nasty. A sudden, deafening crack of thunder echoed through the building. Lightning illuminated the theater windows, and everyone jumped in their seats, right on cue with the movie. I couldn't help but laugh, the timing too perfect to be planned. The storm had really picked up, pouring rain rattling against the windows. It made the dim lights in the shop downstairs flicker, which I only noticed as I left the theater and headed back down. Flynn had snuck off a little earlier, saying something about grabbing the next movie for the queue. I descended the creaky stairs, the hum of the old films playing through the walls. Just as I reached the last step, lightning flashed again, and the room went momentarily white, followed by a boom of thunder that seemed to shake the very floor beneath me. I shook my head, grinning to myself. Flynn loved Friday the 13th, especially one as dramatic as this. "Flynn," I called out, stepping behind the counter to check the register, fully expecting him to pop out from some shadowy corner. And, of course, he did. He timed it just as another bolt of lightning struck, diving out from behind a row of horror movies. With a loud boo, I screamed, slapping his arm instinctively, and he burst into laughter, pulling me close before I could get away. His lips found mine in a soft, warm kiss. The contrast to the storm outside, making it feel all the more comforting. "You're too easy," Flynn teased, brushing his thumb over my cheek. Always so jumpy, I rolled my eyes, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. "Yeah, well, I have a reason to be, especially on nights like this. Something weird always happens on Friday the 13th. I'm starting to think I'm cursed." Flynn raised an eyebrow, that familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Oh? And what makes you say that?" I sighed, stepping back and leaning against the counter as I crossed my arms, the rain tapping against the windows behind me. "Okay, so remember last year when I was doing the end-of-day paperwork behind the desk?" He nodded, waiting for me to continue. I looked up, and there was this guy standing by the horror section, I said, feeling a little chill run down my spine at the memory. He was wearing this creepy mask, like one of those old porcelain doll faces, and just staring at me. Flynn's grin faded, his expression shifting from amused to something more serious. "Wait, what? Who was he?" "That's the thing. I don't know. I didn't hear the bell ring when he came in, and when I greeted him, he didn't say anything. He just kept watching me while he browsed the shelves." "Okay, that's seriously messed up," Flynn said, taking a step closer. "What happened after?" "Well, I kept trying to act normal, like maybe he was just one of those weird horror buffs who gets really into it." I shrugged, feeling the goosebumps rise on my arms. But then he was just gone. No bell, no nothing. One second he was there, the next he wasn't. "Jesus, Amelia, that's creepy as hell," Flynn muttered, looking around as if expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "What the hell is wrong with people? Coral Cove is supposed to be safe." "Yeah, well, that's what I thought too. But every Friday the 13th, something strange happens." I glanced over at the old TV sets lining the back wall, one of them flickering ominously, as if the storm outside had seeped into the electronics. Flynn shook his head. "That's insane. Did you ever find out who it was?" "Nope. Never saw him again," I replied, my voice softer now. "I even checked the cameras, but nothing." Flynn stared at me for a moment, clearly freaked out by the story. Before he could say anything else, another loud clap of thunder boomed through the shop, making the old bells on the door chime just as the lightning flashed again. I froze for a split second, watching the window, and Flynn turned to look at the door. When he glanced back at me, his eyes widened, and he took a step back. Flynn let out a yell, nearly tripping over the counter stool in his panic. I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter. I had slipped on the same creepy mask from the back room, the one we kept for Halloween decorations. "You should have seen your face," I howled, tears of laughter streaming down my cheeks as I pulled the mask off. "Priceless!" Flynn clutched his chest, breathing heavily, before shaking his head at me. "You're a menace," he said, stepping forward and wrapping his arms around me. "And I don't know why I put up with you," I grinned, tilting my head up to meet his gaze. "Because you love me," I teased. He rolled his eyes, but leaned down to kiss me again. The storm outside, a distant rumble, compared to the warmth between us. "Yeah, I do," he murmured, pulling me closer. The rain kept falling. The thunder rolled. And in that small, cozy corner of Coral Cove, surrounded by dusty VHS tapes and flickering lights, we felt untouchable. No matter how cursed the night might be, "You're my rock." The bride and groom danced their first dance together, the room dark, the spotlight on them. Imogen Carlson tried and failed to grit her teeth. God, nothing was simple these days. Not even the simple acts of jealousy and resentment. How cruel this dance was to parade their beautiful normalcy for everyone to see. She glared. Her mother leaned over, but not too close. Gosh, no. And whispered into her ear, "Do try to smile, dear. You're positively green with envy. It is your cousin's wedding, after all. Couldn't you try to look happy for her? And do something about those straps, will you, dear? They're, slipping." She winced. Pun intended? But Imogen did as her mother requested. She was already on the fringes of society since her accident. She ought not to exacerbate things. Imogen sat upright straighter and forced a smile onto the thing the mirror insisted was her face. She then dug out the dress straps, which had started to dig into both shoulders. The married couple, hands clasped, faces inches apart, spun across the floor in sync. Now and then, they snuck a kiss, much to the delight of the onlookers, who cheered and whistled. The muscles beneath Imogen's eyes twitched. All she wanted was to stay at home and hide away in her room, behind the safety of closed curtains. Yes, lock herself away and await any news from the doctors and scientists. Of course, there was the possibility that they might never understand her issue or find a cure. Mum and Dad had said she couldn't isolate herself like a leper if that were the case. When she retorted that she was a leper, they'd only looked at her with wounded puppy dog eyes. And here they were, watching a couple do everyday things, like touching and kissing. She'd never experience these things again, unless she were okay with screams in response. The song wound to an end, and the crowd roared and applauded. The couple opened up the dance floor to friends and family, waving them over. The music changed from elegant to upbeat. Imogen's parents got up, hand in hand. Her father reached out for her, then stopped before he could hurt himself. "Would you like to?" he said, nodding towards the dancing mob. When he saw the slight shake of his wife's head, he answered himself, "No, I suppose you better not." Acidic bile stung the back of her throat. God, she wanted some cake. But she was afraid that people would watch her as she ate, horrified, but unable to look away. "Kill me now," she muttered under her breath. "Oh, if I did that, I wouldn't get to introduce you to Alan." Imogen jumped and yelped. It was Martin, the groom. He wore a tux and held a glass of white wine by the stem. He was smiling at her, a mischievous twinkle in his eyes, heart squelching in her chest. Imogen frowned. What was he here to do? Make fun of her? Pull a prank on her? She'd had enough of that from the local kids, who posted jelly packets through their letterbox. She supposed Mum had told her sister, who told her daughter and her groom-to-be. Not that they wouldn't have been able to see that something was wrong with her as soon as she showed up. During their first dance, the only light sources were the DJ's spotlight and Imogen's skin. "Who's Alan?" Martin's smile widened. He was tipsy. "An old school chum of mine. I thought you two would hit it off." Imogen's furrowed brow deepened. Martin had to be joking. And why on earth would anybody hit it off with someone like me? "You can see me, right? Because you're looking positively radiant tonight," said Martin with a wink. Imogen stared at him. He faltered. "Sorry, not funny." The corners of her lips twitched. She could see why her cousin liked this man. He was kind and genuine. "It was a little funny," she conceded. He relaxed. "Alan's a great guy, and he just arrived. He couldn't make it to the ceremony, otherwise you'd have definitely noticed him. There had to be a catch." "Okay, well, what's wrong with him then?" Martin nodded, as though he'd expected this. "Alan had a little accident a few months back. He's been struggling with it. I thought the two of you might have a lot to talk about." Imogen winced. Man, she had a tongue of acid sometimes, like the rest of her. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean..." She shook her head. "Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's meet the guy." Martin downed the last of his wine, set it on the table, and took a fresh glass from a passing waiter's tray. "Great. Come, I'll introduce you to him. He's right over there. Now listen, he's a little sensitive about his looks, but..." Martin stopped and looked at her, swaying. "I don't think you'll judge him too harshly on that account." Imogen gasped when she saw him. Alan was sat alone in the far corner of the room, where the shadows swam, nursing a drink. He appeared to be a stone golem. "Imogen," slurred Martin, gesturing back and forth. This is Alan I was telling you about. Alan, this is... Imogen stepped forward with a genuine smile for the first time in months. She cut Martin off. Imogen, she said. It's a pleasure to meet you, Alan. Alan groaned, eyes fixated on his drink, which the servers had served him in a metal beer stein. Yeah, sure it is. You've had your look at me now. I haven't finished having my look at you, Alan. Alan flinched, looked up, then gasped. Oh, he said. Oh, she answered. Martin laughed, his glass of wine half empty. All right, I'll pat myself on the back and leave you two to get to know each other. Have fun. She sat beside Alan, who could not take his eyes off her. She removed her polyester gloves to reveal her transparent, gooey green skin. Car crash, 2 lorries, each carrying mutagenic agents, collided. Nobody was hurt, except for a certain Imogen Carlson. She was trapped in her Pinto when the chemicals combined to make something new. Now I can't touch organic materials without absorbing and dissolving them. Alan nodded. He'd ripped his suit where he'd tried to pull it on over his gravel surface. I was backpacking alone when I got the phone call that my mum had fallen down the stairs. I rushed home, taking a shortcut through the haunted mountains. I ignored all the warning signs telling you not to. I guess the mountains took it as an insult and cursed me to a life of cold stoniness. Mum's fine, by the way. Her heart ached for him. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. Must suck not being able to touch anyone. Doctors much help? She shook her head. Nope. They've no idea. Mine neither. They said they've never seen any rock like it, that it doesn't seem to be organic. She gaped at him. She looked from her green, gloopy hand to his rocky one. She looked at him, a question in her eyes. Alan took a minute to register the importance of what he'd said, eyes widening. And then he smiled and answered the question by taking her hand with his. He did not scream. There was no bubbling or sizzling. Imogen did not feel the strange sensation of eating via something other than her mouth. She'd experienced it before, and it wasn't pleasant. Wow, she said, unable to say more. Alan leaned closer. Would you like to dance, Imogen? She thought about it, then threw her anxieties to the wind. Yeah. Yes, I would, Alan. On their way to the dance floor, Alan stepped on a man's foot, breaking it. Alan didn't notice the screams for an ambulance. She had his complete attention. On their way to the dance floor, Imogen brushed a woman's hair with her ungloved arm, eating the strands. She didn't notice the little shriek or the woman's death glare. He had her complete attention. Doctors have called it thingification, after the thing from Fantastic Four. My guys are calling mine blebitis, like in The Blob. I see you've also spent a lot of time hiding away indoors. glued to the screen. I have too. Guess we're not so alone now, huh? She nodded. Question. The Blob. Original from 1958 or the 1988 remake? Alan pondered as they started to dance, a wide circle of empty dance floor opening up around them. The original's got its charms, but for me, the remake takes the cake. Blasphemy, I know. Imogen couldn't help but smile. Those were her thoughts exactly. She leaned forward and kissed him on his stony lips. When I first saw you, my legs turned to jelly. Alan, grinning after the initial shock of the kiss, pulled her close so they were dancing skin to skin. And when I saw you, it warmed my cold stone heart. Imogen sighed and rested her head against his chest. What a wonderful wedding.